Hi, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. I am your host, Todd Embley, and I'm pleased to be joined by John Gearing, a retail executive who has led APAC regional operations for some of the world's largest consumer companies. John, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Okay, where in the world are you placed today that we are recording you from?
So right now I'm actually at my home in Edinburgh, at the west end of Edinburgh. I came in from India via Dubai and last Friday.
Awesome. Okay, yeah, I don't think, if I remember correctly, we have never recorded anybody from Scotland or who is currently based in Scotland. So this is new for us. Hey, quick, what's the weather like over there?
It's really, really warm. I mean, I love summer in Scotland. Last year it was Wednesday, the 22nd of June. This year we seem to be having a slightly more prolonged summer period. It's about 22, 23 degrees out there. It's warm.
And then we're talking Celsius, right?
Yes, sorry, yeah.
Hey, we do Celsius here in Canada too, but I just thought I'd point that out because maybe some of our American listeners might have thought, "Holy smokes, you think that's warm?"
Well, it
Okay,
is Scotland.
yeah, that's true. Give us a quick introduction into yourself and the work that you do at your consultancy, JBG Consulting and Advisory.
Sure. I mean, I went to Asia 30 years ago, almost to the day, actually, the day I turned 21. And I'm about to turn 51 for those of you who can't do quick maths. And I've been there on and off ever since. I originally went out there on a secondment to the Royal Hong Kong Police, so you're talking to one of the last colonial police officers. I did about 3 years before coming back to the UK very quickly and starting my commercial career. So, and then I was back in China. I saw China in the early years, 98, 99, when it was all just beginning. And then via different jobs and educational institutions, I bounced around Asia, really, Thailand, Taiwan, China, and a little bit in UK and even Scandinavia as well. And I've really been running consumer brands throughout that time. The last two sorts of roles to bring everybody up to speed. I was a portfolio MD for VF Corporation. When we acquired Timberland, that came into my portfolio a couple of years after the acquisition. That was a tough job for sure. That was a big beast.
Mm.
Um, and after leaving VF, in fact, just before leaving VF, actually, I was asked to be part of one of the founding group of what is now called Contour Brands, which was a spin-off of the Lee and Wrangler jeans brands from VF.
Mm-hmm.
And we listed in May 2019 in New York. My role there was to run Asia Pacific, be part of the global leadership team. And I've just wrapped up with Contour. Pretty lengthy process actually. So I continue to work with them for a year or so beyond my original plan. And indeed, I'm still working for them as an advisor on a number of matters. And now I'm really operating. I'm enjoying being an independent operator, which brings a lot of freedom actually. For example, I can do this podcast and speak freely about Asia and the business and my experience without having an army of PR people behind me saying what I can, what I can say and what I cannot. Um,
Yeah.
I think, I'm very much focused now on working in the private market space. I found public markets increasingly difficult to operate in. There is a real tension between doing the right thing to grow a brand over time and doing the right thing for the quarterly calls, the earning reports, and therefore the short-term stock price. I found that tension increasingly onerous. And so I'm really focusing now on, I'd say, small to medium enterprises, below 300 million in turnover, privately held or private equity backed, because I feel like I can add more value, impact businesses more directly and more quickly in that space.
Mm.
So I work with family offices, for example, who are looking to invest or acquire consumer brands. I work with private equity firms who already have them or are looking to turn them around. Um, and so that's where I am now. I'm really enjoying it actually. I'm a lot busier than I expected. This was supposed to be semi-retirement. It hasn't felt like that at all. That lasted about a week.
Well, I don't know if we ever really retire. I hopefully I certainly don't see myself sitting on a beach every day for a decade doing nothing.
No,
I'm probably going to be handing something until they tell me to go away, which will
I,
eventually happen.
I agree with you. I think it's more about choice than stopping.
Yeah, it's just maybe diminishing some of the workload and more time doing some things like golf, but we'll see. Um, so I want to lean in a bit on some of the APAC focused leadership posts that you've had.
Absolutely.
I know you mentioned VF and Contour. We've seen Adidas
Yes.
in your background. Company called Boots.
Company called Boots.
Yeah.
Boots it still is, I think. It's the UK's biggest chemist, large format, small format. And they are currently owned, I think, by Walgreens.
Oh wow. Okay.
Walgreens purchased them several years ago.
I
And
thought maybe that was a typo when I came across. I'm like, does he mean
no,
roots? But
no,
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 boots.
no. It was a company founded in the 19th century by a guy called Jesse Boot.
Huh?
Um, it was a magnificent company in business. I'm sure it still is in many ways, but it's no longer standalone. It's been swallowed up by Walgreens, I think. I
Hmm.
think that's still the case. So yeah,
Okay. Well,
I was boots, I was retail, I was not, I was business development for them in Asia Pacific. They own things like Nurofen and other drugs, other OTC drugs at the time as well.
okay. Well, maybe if you don't mind, we could walk through and have you walk us through a bit of that timeline of when you were at each one and what your role was, some of the impactful stuff that you did in APEC, and I think along the way, just teaching our audience a little bit about about that area, about that roles, about the struggles, about the wins, about the stuff that you learned, and any surprises that you had along the way.
Absolutely. I think what I'd like to do is I'd like to start with my role at Adidas, which started in 2005. I think that's far
Okay.
enough back.
Okay.
Um, or Adidas, as I know you chaps like to say. But it is Adidas, just to be clear.
I agree. It is. I know.
So, look, I joined. It was interesting actually because I was head of M&A I was still in the sort of the healthcare sector really. I was head of M&A for a big British opticians at the time, very acquisitive. And for personal reasons, I needed to go back to Hong Kong, and I had these two job offers. One was to work with KPMG in their consumer M&A practice, and one was for Adidas setting up their retail business. And I remember the guy from KPMG saying to me, you know, the job's yours, John, if you want it, but bear this in mind, I spent my whole life wanting to be on the other side of the desk. So
Mm.
I took the Adidas role, but really that was a one-man band job. Adidas, like a lot of brands in Asia at the time, and in fact still now, were accidental retailers because multi-brand formats they still don't really exist in China, although that is changing very quickly. So Adidas suddenly found itself with 1,000 plus shops called Adidas, but with no infrastructure, very little capability to run those stores. And some of them were directly owned and some of them were franchised. And if you can't run your own stores directly, it's very hard to tell your franchisees how to run their store operations. So, you know, my role there, and we built a team out to do it, was to create a regional retail capability, management capability, so strategic control, tactical support. That's the way I like to frame it up. Um, and a lot of brands have found themselves in that position. I've actually found myself doing it pretty much the exact same role for a short period of time in VF when they too realized that they suddenly had 4,000, 5,000 stores across the region, but retail excellence per se wasn't really one of their core competencies at the time, and they recognized that. So, you know, we did that for Adidas, and I think one of the dangers there, and actually one of the things I learned and took away from me there was the importance of not trying to control the local markets, the importance of just providing a strategic framework and tactical tools. Strategic direction and control, yes, this is what the short stores look like, this is the kind of productivity you should expect, you know, support services, fixtures and fittings and so on and so forth that we can buy and get volume benefits, and we can help with training and so on. But you've really got to let the local markets do what the local markets need to do within that strategic framework. And that is an absolute central pillar of how I've managed businesses ever since, in Asia Pac and generally. Trying to control the minutiae of what a market operator is doing, whether it's franchise or your own team, is A, a waste of time, and B, I think you're turning away from a lot of local insight and a lot of local expertise that will actually help your business. So I was around 5 years in Adidas and running the retail business there. And then I moved to a much smaller brand, True Religion brand jeans, which was absolutely at its peak of popularity at the time. And we were able to sell denim at $400-500. But again, they were a victim of their own popularity, because they were selling in a huge amount of merchandise into markets like South Korea and even into China. But they had no infrastructure in the region. It was all done out of LA and through sales agents. So there was no control of how the brand was showing up, right? There was very little control in terms of where the brand was being distributed, actually. So again, there's another key lesson there, right? You can keep selling in, but without the discipline, without that operational control, you're going to end up with inventory gluts. You're going to end up with your brand not being presented the way you want it presented. You're going to end up with in bed with distributors that you don't want to be in bed with, who aren't taking care of your brand. So very, very much a key lesson there. Now, I didn't spend too long at True Religion brand jeans. I only spent a couple of years there. The primary reason for that, and I feel like I can say this in the podcast, is that I fell in love with my sales director and we ended up getting married. So that clearly wasn't a role that I could continue in, right? Ultimately conflicted. I always say that I fell in love with my wife while she was presenting the line, right? She's still the best wholesale presenter I've ever seen. So I didn't stay there for long. I chose my marriage over my job. And luckily, VF came along, and I was taken into VF as the contemporary fashion portfolio MD for Asia Pacific. I had a pretty broad portfolio of businesses. And I have to say that I spent the first 6 months in VF, despite my MBA and all the INSEAD qualifications. I spent my first 6 months at VF feeling like the thickest guy in the room, because it was such high quality people that I was working with, and they were working at such pace, at such detail, and with such commercial acumen that, I just decided to shut up and listen and learn for 6-9 months and really not do much at all. I was full of admiration for that business and learned so much from there. But ultimately, I think I hope I found my feet and ended up taking on Timberland into my portfolio, Nautica. I think I did about 10 brands for them in the end, whether that was, just post-acquisition, the full management, or helping with the disposal. But honestly, VF was a machine, and a fairly exhausting machine. And at that point, I was ready to take a break. But, Scott Baxter, the CEO and chairman of Contour Brands, as it now is, gave me a call and said, "Look, John, with your denim background," because I had Seven for Mankind, some other brand, and True Religion brand jeans, of course. He said, "Look, VF's allowing me to spin the Lee and Wrangler brands. Would you come on board as one of the founders?" It was just too good an opportunity to say no to. And again, I've got to say, I think Contour really got it right. They took the best of VF and married it with Scott's vision for how a business should be run, and created something very, very special. And I don't think, I'm bound to say, I don't think they've put a foot wrong in the 4 or 5 years that I've been working with them. I think they've got a great balance of global control and regional and market execution. I think they've got a great balance between that VF sort of cutting edge business management, but also allowing people the work-life balance and the great culture that Scott has inculcated in the business. So I really think Contour was a great time for me to quit, as it were, corporate life, because I just don't know how it would get too much better, frankly. and taking everything I learned along that journey and working with, as I say, in the private market space, felt really like the right time. So that kind of brings you up to where we are today.
I have to ask, as a North American, and the brand the brand building that Wrangler has done throughout my lifetime, and what I think and how I feel when I hear the brand name Wrangler, and then I think about Asia or China, okay? So I don't see a fit, I guess, in a way, what I'm saying. Aren't you, I feel like you're supposed to be on a horse or on a ranch, or driving cattle in Yellowstone, and So, how did that go with those brands? Lee, very similar as well, into the Asia region.
So Lee and Wrangler under VF were reasonably separate from the US and Europe, and developed their own products, but adhering to the core DNA of the brand. Um, so honestly, Lee is very successful. I don't want to go into the detail of the metrics around that, but it's very successful in China and Asia generally. Wrangler has been very good through our licensee partners outside of China, and then we launched in China a couple of years back. Absolutely not a great time to launch. You'd imagine just before the COVID lockdown and all the other bits and pieces that we had to contend with.
Mm-hmm.
But the marketing folks, and in particular the global marketing folks working in collaboration with the Asia Pacific marketing leader, did a lot of research as to what sits behind that cowboy element for the Wrangler brand. Not cowboy, but what sits behind it. What's the spirit of the cowboy? Individuality, standing up for what you believe in, freedom of thought, all of this good stuff. And I've just butchered that. The marketing guys would do a much, much better job. But a lot of brands are going to face that, right? You need to take a step back and distill the brand to its essence, right? Its core characteristics, and then think, well, how can I take that and apply that so that it's locally relevant and appeals to the consumer in whatever market I'm operating in? The idea of a cookie cutter is a myth. Everybody wants to believe it. Every brand you want to talk to says, look, I'm going to do all my product out of San Francisco, out of London, out of New York, out of Paris. There are very, very few brands that can do that. Very, very few. And I think most of them are in the sort of the super luxury space, right? And there is no cookie cutter, right? You have to do that. You have to go through that. So I talk about a brand being, and I take this right down to the seasonal toolkits that we provide our partners, to three elements. It's stone, it's wood, and it's clay, right? Some elements are stone. They're carved in stone. Don't mess with them. Don't touch them. It has to look like this. Probably a logo, probably a color palette, and certainly that brand DNA, that essence, right? And then there's a bunch of stuff that I would classify as wood, right? Which is, it's pretty solid, but you can carve this around. You can reshape this to a degree, right, to make it relevant for your market, right? That may be, for example, a local campaign. Let's keep something really easy. Christmas. Right? Christmas in North America, a window for a store at Christmas in North America is going to look quite different to the one in Shanghai, right? But the tonality will be the same. It's still Christmas. And then there's clay, which I don't really care what you do with, right? It's just aspects, it's tools, it's things that you can adopt or not adopt. But if you don't adopt it, then I'm going to need to see what you are going to do, and I'm going to need my folks to make sure that it's still consistent. That's the way you get global consistency with local relevance. And again, I've summarized that to the nth degree, but that is essentially what it is. At the tactical level, I call it the season in a box for a partner or a market. Here's the season. This is stone. This is wood. This is clay. Does that make sense?
I like that. No, that absolutely makes sense. I mean, you're going from what you can't mess around with, and this is fixed, to what you can carve and maybe manipulate, to what you can just fully mold.
Yes,
which is the clay, right? So
exactly.
yeah, no, I really like that. Um, let's stay with that 2005 marker with the Adidas time and move forward from there. And what I want to ask you is, and you touched on something like COVID. Okay, that's obviously been something that dramatically shifted all areas of life, including marketing and brands and entry and stuff like this. But what about just a timeline from your perspective and in your opinion of, say, the last 18 years of market conditions? Because I don't know of anywhere in the world where things have changed more or more times or turned over than they have in China over the last 18 years. So maybe just your thoughts and opinions on how market conditions have changed and evolved over, the 18 years since 2005.
That's a great question, and I'm going to enjoy answering this. But I'm going to start with the way Ernest Hemingway described going bankrupt. He said it
Mm.
was slowly, slowly, and then all of a sudden. And that is what's happened in not just China, but the APAC markets in general, right?
Mm.
So let's start on the periphery before we get into China because that's a bigger topic. I mean, let's look at Japan's influence, right? Everybody in the fashion and sports space used to say, right, you've got to succeed in Japan. Japan informs style and trend and everything else and what good looks like for the rest of the region. That was true in 2005. That's not true anymore. It's still a fantastic place, producing some fantastic products and campaigns and business practices. Don't get me wrong, but it is nowhere near the influence that it was. Whereas South Korea was nowhere. South Korea was a copycat from a style and trend and fashion point of view. It really was. It just, where everybody else went, they sort of followed on. South Korea is absolutely leading the charge now in things like retail operations, retail tech, brand marketing, product. Amazing. I mean, the Contour licensee in South Korea has just done a phenomenal job. And of course, it's extremely popular. I mean, I was on a call this morning with some folks in Australia, and they were saying, "Can you get us access to South Korean designers?" All the way down in Australia. I mean, that was a surprise to me. So, that sort of style, fashion, trend, cutting edge business has fundamentally shifted as well. But if you look at China now, right? Look, my favorite ripoff in 2005, they had 300 shops in China and it was called Adidas.
Mm. Yeah.
Right? Adidas.
Yeah.
Right. And really, of course, that's an extreme and I've used a deliberately extreme example there and I hope slightly amusing example to make a point, right? Which is that's kind of what China was. The local brands were either outright copycats like that or kind of just nowhere, right? Chinese brands now are doing incredibly well. They do an amazing job. They do an amazing job with production, with design, with retailing, with branding. I get asked the question a lot, who should we be looking at as a competitor? And of course, in everybody's mind, if you're Adidas, it's Nike. If you're Contour, maybe it's Levi. But actually, the answer I always give is you need to look at the local brands, guys, right? Because they are absolutely eating your lunch, and COVID has massively exacerbated that. Because whilst everybody, all the international brands, almost I can say almost all, frankly, took a huge step back from China, stopped investing. The sales weren't there. Geopolitics was kicking off. There was lots of reasons, very sensible reasons to be wary. But whilst they did that, the local brands all took a huge step forward and invested in their stores, invested in their concepts, invested in CRM, invested in their design capabilities. It's going to be really hard for international brands who took that step back to regain that territory. Really difficult. And it used to be, again, another huge change. I'm sure you've seen this, and I'm sure lots of people on your podcast have spoken about this. There was a time, let's be honest, you could turn up in China with an international brand, pop it in a few hundred department stores, open a couple of flagships, and you were good as gold, right? Because it was an international brand. That is
Hmm.
absolutely not true. The playing field has shifted now. It's gone from you're an international brand, I'd rather buy you, to being a level playing field, which is you're an international brand. I'm only going to buy you if you're as good as the China brand or better than the China brand. Sorry, right? To where we are now on a macro level, where I think a lot of consumers are thinking, look, I really want to buy Chinese, right? So if you're an international brand, you've really got to convince me. You've really got to convince me why I should buy you rather than the home brand. The Mandarin term, I'm sure you know, is Guotao, right?
Hmm.
Massive, massive change. And then moving further west to India, where I've just spent the last 3 months getting into the detail of a business there and the market there. India has kind of, made faltering steps forward. I mean, we all know the demographic story. You know, we all know that one and why that should be good, but it never quite was. But now India is just moving so quickly, and the consumer is moving so quickly. India, to me, feels a lot like China in the late 90s, but they're going to get there quicker.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I really believe that. I'm an India bull. They will get there quicker. So I believe strongly that China is still a fantastic market to be in. You need to be there. All the noise that is around the place. Yes, I get it. Right? Of course I get it. But it's still 1.4 billion people. It's still heading broadly in the right direction. It's still growing 4 or 5% a year. It's tougher. It's not easy like it was. Right, there's lots more competition, as I've just pointed out, but it's still a fantastic market to be. Whereas India is just at the beginning, and I
Oh,
don't think many brands have worked that out yet. I think they're still mired in the justifiable views and perceptions of India that have formed over the last 10, 15 years. It's fundamentally changing, Todd.
absolutely. A lot of your more recent background, I would say, or at least it was increasingly important from what we're disseminating from your background, is that direct to consumer channels became increasingly important. um, and obviously we saw with drop shipping and Shopify type platforms and whatnot, it became huge. And I was interested kind of in what you said about the growth of local brands. I think it because they were the masters of manufacturing and processes and building. What they did seem to lack was the ability to actually market and grow a brand and do brand building. That wasn't
Mm.
there wasn't a large amount of muscle memory, or a muscle in those areas just across the country. I think if they'd be able to invest in it and quickly scale that up now, but 10 years ago it wasn't necessarily there. So looking, and I know a lot of manufacturers, they built amazing plants, but they were looking for international brands to sell to, because that was going to be the more difficult hill for them to climb. um, Drop shipping really kind of came on the forefront. Go on AliExpress or Tmall or something, find a supplier who makes some things. You think I can market that and make a fortune by selling that 5 cent thing for $5 here. And then Amazon fulfillment centers can handle everything, and this whole thing, and that is changing now as well. But back to kind of the question that I want to ask is about how e-commerce changed the game for retail brands over the years in APAC.
Another really good question and something I could talk about for hours. So I'll try to curtail my enthusiasm on this topic. The Where we are today is that it is impossible, really, to look at your business and say, this is wholesale, this is a shop, this is a brick and mortar store, and this is my e-commerce business. Right? You can't look at it like that. And yet that's the way almost many businesses are structured. Everything is a touch point with the consumer. All of those are just nodes in a network of touch points with the consumer. And once you've grasped that, you start to look at the business completely differently. You know, you used to sign off stores at a store level, right? The four wall needs to be 20% or whatever it is, you know, profitability assessment. You can't do that anymore because if you do that, you won't be opening stores in the right location. You need to take a big step back and look at the whole portfolio of the business across all of those channels and say, how does this contribute, not just from a revenue and profit perspective, but also from a brand perspective and from a consumer touch point? Is this store click and collect? Is it a distribution center? What is it? Right? What is the purpose of this store? That's what e-commerce has done. It has completely altered the way retailers and brands need to look at their network, at their distribution networks. Completely altered. And that has happened, back to Ernest Hemingway, slowly, slowly, and then all of a sudden. I would say that now, without wanting to sound like I'm using hyperbole here, I'd say if you don't look at your business in Asia Pacific like that, you are unlikely to be able to scale it because you are unlikely to be able to achieve the kind of returns you need to achieve to justify that investment. If you just look at a store network or a franchise network or e-commerce or whatever it is, you have to look at it very differently.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's an excellent point. There is hours of conversation to be had on that. I have a bit of a logistics background. I used to wear the brown and drive the truck back in the day, and so I have an affinity for that. And
You're a box
so
kicker.
yes, I was. And then security cameras came out, and then all of a sudden you got in trouble for it. Um, you know the logistics infrastructure, the technology platform, obviously smartphones coming out 2007 circa, and a billion people get on the internet and all these kind of things. It was just, I mean, my years of 2007 to 2016 in China were just, it was unbelievable. You just could not keep up. And it was unbelievable. And then how marrying e-commerce and people, we used to have these conversations 3 years ago on the podcast about what's the future of retail and e-commerce and to destroy whatever. And we were having all these deep dive and everybody was moving around. That whole landscape was changing. And then COVID hit, which was just this extra kind of, whatever you want to say. I'm trying not to use bad words, but or war words, but it just really kind of dropped on the whole situation and upended everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the platforms come out and internet banks, really start to take hold and financial, just like, it's just incredible. So
Yeah, it was.
I mean, there's so much that we could talk about there, but I do want to keep it moving, and I apologize to the listeners for taking them down that hole and then cutting them off. A lot of our audience do run and are brand owners at smaller, mid-sized Western consumer brands. And they might, and as we've said, should be considering APAC expansion. Now, everything that we've talked about, it doesn't paint an easy picture, an easy path at all, right? And we talk about how sophisticated things are. Like that. It might be kind of warding people off, right? So in a twofold type of question, why should brands expand into APAC, given some of the likely concerns? And as you mentioned a little bit, about some of the pillars of how they expand successfully, and what does then a successful APAC strategy contain?
Okay, I think the answer to your first question is very, very simple. Where else are you going to get the growth? Honestly, it's that simple. If you're looking to grow your business, frankly, whether you're small, medium, or large, growing in North America is extremely difficult right now. Growing in Europe is probably even more difficult. Right? Where are you going to get it? Where are you going to go for that? So for me, everywhere between Dubai and Japan is where you need to look. South Korea down to Australia, right? That's where you need to go. And yes, I mean, we can, of course, sat here as an advisor, as a consultant to businesses looking to get into Asia Pacific, I am obviously going to say you need to be thoughtful, right, about how you do this. But that's easily, reinforced by looking at sort of case studies. You do need to be thoughtful. Honestly, I think if you go in with your eyes wide open, if you partner with the right people in the market, if you don't try to over control, if you get beyond this myth, the two pervasive myths in my view. One, I'm an international brand, therefore everybody's going to buy my business, my product from the get-go and they're going to love me, right? And two, I can do in Bangalore exactly what I do in Marylebone, London, right? And it's going to be great, right? If you can get beyond those two simple, in my view, blockers, and it's remarkable how many people still have those views, by the way, absolutely remarkable, the expectations that people go in with. And you can work with the right partners in the market. In each market requires a different model. I always say, Japan and India, license it, work with partners. They are so complicated for completely different reasons. Trying to do those markets directly the juice is not worth the squeeze. Right.
Yeah.
But there are other sort of markets in Asia Pacific that sit in between that where you've got different permutations of model that work. So having the right model is also absolutely critical as an operating model. Are you with a JV? Are you direct? Are you with a distributor? Are you with a licensee? And listening, of course, to the local consumer. Back to mind, there's no cookie cutter solution here. Listen to the local consumer, right? And work out what's at the core of your brand. Work out what is stone, what is wood, what is clay at every level, at the strategic level, at the tactical level, at the executional level. Work those things out, and you have a very, very good shot at being successful in the Asia Pacific markets. And then finally, just to sort of bookend that, is don't under-egg your investment, particularly in China. Be realistic about what you're going to need to invest in order to cut through and develop positive awareness for your brand. Underestimating that is a fatal flaw.
Yeah, yeah, agreed. And it's not the first time that advice has been passed along. Just you're prepare for the worst and hope for the best.
Absolutely.
But you just have to be really ready to work, right? Maybe, if this is what you're doing at the twilight of your career, you may, may not, because you need to have some energy and you need
Yeah.
to, you need to almost adopt the 996,
Mm.
and get kind of loco with what you're doing, and you need to compete at that level. And let me tell you, that's the pro leagues right there. So it's going to be much more difficult to win than it may have been for you early on. But anyway,
Mm.
but you have to do it if you
You
want to
do.
scale, if you want to grow. You just really you just need good advice and good partners, and thick skin and a deep wallet.
It's
Now
true.
let's talk about India a little bit. We don't often get to talk about India a lot on this show. And I know that you recently set up, consultancy office there. And I'd like to get your assessment of India. I want to ask you about e-commerce to tie this show off. So we'll hold that piece out a bit, but what is your assessment of India as a consumer market, and should India be on the radar for global consumer brands who aren't already there?
So let's start with the second part. Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
Right. 100% yes. Right. The market, as I said earlier, is moving at an incredibly fast pace. The consumer is moving at an incredibly fast pace. The demographics are moving at an incredibly fast pace and in the right direction as well. Right. The challenge with India is so many people have been there from a business point of view or personal point of view and go, it's incredible India, incredible India, lovely place. But my God, it's complicated. My God, there's clearly huge wealth disparity. The middle class is actually a very small segment. Yes, that's all true. But that was also all true of China 20 years ago. The difference between India today and China 20 years ago is that one, you now have the full fat internet, right? And they are incredibly connected to that, right? The other one is, honestly, the local talent is unbelievably good, and English language is spoken by everybody. So you've got a real enabler there with the digital world, as it were, and you've got an incredible pool of local talent that can help you get there. and help you run your business.
Hmm.
And the Indian business community is so hungry for opportunities. I mean, like you wouldn't believe, you know. You and I shared a story before we started recording, where you shared a story with me about, you know, you got to be successful, so you do what you can. That's exactly what it is in India at the moment. It's a little hard to see through, um, you know, some of what you encounter in India. I mean, let's just balance the picture a little bit, okay? But it's changing so quickly. And the government regulations are also moving in the right direction as well. So absolutely brands need to be there, but all the same rules apply. Don't underestimate the complexity. Work with the right partner. Be prepared to invest. Be patient, right? And
Yeah.
understand the right model
Yeah.
and listen to that
You know,
consumer.
I think that there is a difference in human, in that when you grow up in a place like China or India, the level of compete from early on, from a young age, is so high. And that level of, it's not at that level, I think, in North America. I'm not saying we're soft, but we've never had that hardship of that level of competition on every test in grade 3, in every aspect of what we do, and the pressure that comes from above, and the grandparents and the parents and the family dynamics. That really hardens and raises the level of compete. So now you've got those humans that are infused into companies, and it's infused into their entrepreneurship and their willingness to compete and battle and go for it and work hard. It is something to be experienced, but those are the kind of people that you really want on your team. And
Mm,
those are the type of people, because humans make decisions. Humans build companies and build
mm,
brands and build
mm,
emotional attachment and all the rest of it, marketing
mm,
campaigns. That's who you're competing against.
mm.
Is that hardened level of people and that level of compete that they have, across, like, broadly speaking, in aggregate, is going to be so much higher than what you potentially have faced before if you haven't expanded into those regions. So soapbox time for Todd Embley here, but you
It's
know,
a good soapbox.
I think so. I think so. Let's actually tie that off now with talking about e-commerce. How big is e-commerce? What are the main platforms? What does that sector look like in India?
So, well, the main platforms are obviously you've got Mintra and the other local operators and so on and so forth. I mean, they are dominant, right? There's no doubt about that. But it's not like China back in the day where Tmall, say it quietly, used to shut everybody else down, right? It's not that
Mm-hmm.
at all, right?
Yeah.
Which means you can be on multiple marketplaces. You can operate those businesses and invest across all of them. And you can also have your own web shop as well, right? And you can get the traffic to that web shop. So it's a much broader landscape, and probably one that's more familiar to North American and European operators than the one in China, which was a truly closed ecosystem, like the Galapagos Islands, right? It was
Yeah.
completely different. I mean,
The
I don't know
walled
how many.
gardens.
Yeah, I don't know how many times I've had to explain to some sort of bemused North American, e-com professional that no, Tmall is not like Amazon at all.
Yeah. Well, back in the day, Alibaba used to block um, links to products through searches on Baidu. So
They
that,
did indeed.
would change the whole thing. Like, you can search on Google and then direct link go and buy on Amazon, and they work together like that. It was very different in China. You would do a product search on Baidu, but you had to leave the Baidu ecosystem and re-up and enter yourself into and go find it again on the platform in which you wanted to buy it, because of those walled garden kind of cultures.
Yeah, so you don't get that in India. So the opportunity to excel on e-commerce is really, say, easier, more straightforward, perhaps is a better word, right? Than it was in China back in the day until quite recently, actually. I mean, how big can it be? That's, how long is a piece of string? It depends what your brick and mortar footprint looks like. But I would say India, omni-channel, and I don't particularly like that term. I've actually spent some time defining what that means for folks. And let's define it quickly now, right? So your stores are not just stores, they're click and collect, they're distribution centers, right? They are places where you operate your CRM, they are places where you communicate your brand, and you have a single view of inventory so that you don't have captive inventory for different channels, different geographies, and so on and so forth, right? That's what I mean when I say omni-channel. It's an absolute must in India, particularly given the geography and the way the population or the consumer population that we're probably going to be interested in are dispersed around the country. But India is also so much more than Delhi and Mumbai, right? Which is what people think of, I think. Those tier two cities are tier two, tier three are coming up incredibly quickly. And just, a little personal thing here. I flew up from London to Edinburgh on Monday and was delayed for 4 hours due to a thunderstorm at Heathrow, sat on the tarmac. It took me 9 hours to go 500-600 miles. And I swear blind now. I'm not traveling domestic in the UK ever again. Right? I'm going to drive everywhere. Right? Whereas when I travel in India, it's fantastic to places that you wouldn't think, being an ignorant, bigoted Westerner, should be fantastic. Right? Go to Udaipur, and your experience at the airport is incredibly smooth, despite there being lots of people there. I mean, the Bangalore new terminal is amazing. Right? And so all of this is coming together, and I think that's what makes India so exciting.
Oh gosh, I want to go there so bad.
I do. You won't ever see the world the same again.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. More. Well, probably less on that from me. Hopefully for the audience, but I'd like to actually. I mean, I'd like to go for a couple of years to places if I really want to kind of understand, digest the culture a little bit. So I tend to do it in big chunks, like I did with China. But I think it's exciting. I think we're going to start talking about India a lot more, just being Southeast Asia and trying to cover everything. It is a little bit untapped, especially for us on the podcast, but it is definitely another region right in behind that needs to be on people's radar as well. So completely agree with you. John Gearing, he is the founder, the owner of his own consultancy, JBG Consulting and Advisory. John, thank you very much for coming on the show today.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, as usual, for everybody who is listening to the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, wherever, don't forget that we have the video on YouTube, on the WPIC YouTube channel. You get your shorts, you get the full-length thing. Everything is there. You can come and see John and I. But then if you're watching us on the YouTube channel, don't forget that we also have the podcast. If you need your hands and your eyes for other things, then yes, you can just plug in the headphones and listen to us there. So from all of us at The Negotiation, for myself and for John Gearing, thank you very much for coming on the show. We will see you next time.